Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going to be jumping into The 100. You know that show where they send those 100 teenagers back down to Earth after like almost 100 years in space?
Yeah.
After the apocalypse.
Yeah, pretty wild premise.
I know, right? And we've got a ton of cool stuff to go through today, like tons of fan discussions, character analyses, even some like survival guides people have put together.
It's amazing how much this show has sparked people's imaginations.
It really is.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, let's see what this whole The 100 world can teach us about, surviving, well, pretty much anything, really.
I think that's a great idea. The 100 is more than just like dodging radiation and weird mutated animals. It really makes you think about what does it even mean to be human, especially when you're under all this pressure, like intense pressure.
Totally. I mean, picture this. You're on this relatively safe space station,
Yeah.
right? And then, bam, you're dropped onto Earth. You got to figure out how to find food, build shelter, deal with all the usual teenage drama. But on top of that, you got to figure out if the planet is even going to let you live E.
That's some serious adulting, thrown right into the deep end.
No kidding. And the challenges they face, like right off the bat, are huge EE. Radiation, totally unfamiliar terrain, barely any resources. It's like starting from scratch.
They do have some knowledge, though, right? Like from the Ark, their space station.
Right, they have that. But it only takes them so far. They've got to learn new skills, adapt super quick, on the fly.
That's where things get super interesting. They have zero adults around to, guide them. It's just like kids leading kids.
Which brings us to Clark and Bellamy. Two leaders, but like total opposites. But both are super compelling.
Yeah. Clark, she's like the ultimate strategist, thinking 10 steps ahead, always. She's all about logic and minimizing loss, building a future where, everybody can actually live.
Right. And then there's Bellamy. He's more shoot from the hip, the risk taker. But just like Clark, he's super protective of his people. And the show does such a great job of showing how their styles clash, especially like right at the beginning.
Oh, absolutely. Like when they had to decide about the grounders, remember that? The original Earth survivor?
Oh, totally. Clark was all cautious, right? But Bellamy was basically ready to team up with them immediately.
He was. What's cool is that Clark and Bellamy show us how there's not just one right way to lead. Sometimes you need that careful strategy, right? But other times you got to go with your gut, take a risk.
Yeah. You got to know when to use each approach. And honestly, that's such a valuable skill no matter what you're doing, leading a team at work, dealing with a family emergency.
It's like they embody the two sides of how humans react to a crisis. Some plan, some react. But you need both to, get through it.
Totally. And in the end, it was that mix, the caution and the willingness to adapt that let them survive that first contact with the grounders.
For sure. And speaking of the grounders, their arrival really throws a wrench in things. You've got the 100 who grew up in this structured space station, and then suddenly they bump into people who've been surviving on this harsh Earth,
Right. The grounders have their own language, their own customs, their own way of fighting.
It's almost like, making contact with aliens, even though they're all human.
I know. That language barrier alone caused so much tension and misunderstandings. Like,
Yeah.
you can totally see why things got out of control so fast. It makes you wonder, like, if there was just one person who could translate, would things have been different?
Absolutely. Just like the 100 had to figure out what plants they could eat and which ones would kill them, being able to communicate, that's a key survival skill.
Totally. It's all about being resourceful, no matter what you're up against. And this show, it highlights how crucial communication is for bridging those gaps between people. It's about finding common ground, even if it's just that shared need to survive.
Exactly. It's not just about understanding the words, but the motivations behind them, the fears, the hopes.
It really is. Reminds me of this one time I traveled to, well, let's just say it was a place where I didn't speak the language.
Yeah.
And wow, did I feel like I was on a different planet.
I can only imagine.
So the 100 and the grounders, they start to find ways to communicate, right? It's kind of rough at first. But they begin to see each other as, human.
They go from being straight up enemies to, well, maybe not friends right away, but something closer to allies.
Which, let's be real, is something we can all relate to. It's that whole idea of recognizing our shared humanity.
Yeah.
Even without the whole, end of the world scenario.
It's something we could all use a little more of.
Exactly. But the 100 isn't just survival tactics and cultural clashes. It gets into these really deep themes that resonate with everyone, no matter what world you live in.
Totally. Like the relationships that form, the fierce loyalty within the 100.
Right. But then there's also the betrayals, the really devastating ones. It's like, wow, trust can be broken so easily, especially when it's a life or death situation.
The show doesn't hold back on that. It's real. And it makes you think about the choices you'd make if you were in their shoes.
It does. So we've covered a lot here. Survival skills, clashing leadership styles, how important communication is when cultures collide. What surprised you the most so far about the 100?
You know what? It's how it dives into those moral dilemmas, how complex they are. These kids are always facing these tough choices, and there are no easy answers.
Like, do they choose their own survival or risk it all for someone else? Do they fight for peace, or when it seems like there's no other option, do they resort to violence?
Exactly. It really makes you think about what you would do, pushes you to examine your own values.
And that's what makes the 100 so gripping. It's not just about surviving the apocalypse. It's about what it means to be human, the good, the bad, and the messy. And that's something we all deal with.
So true. Whether you're facing down a grounder or just trying to get through Monday morning, it's about recognizing that sometimes the right choice, it's the hardest one to make.
Absolutely. And there are always consequences, no matter how good your intentions are. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from this show.
It really is. It's a theme woven through every single character's journey. And speaking of journeys, we're about to go deep on two characters today. Two who really grabbed my attention.
Okay, I am ready. Who are we diving into?
Today, we're going to explore the incredible transformations of Octavia and Bellamy Blake.
Let's do it. I'm fascinated by both of them, their journeys, and what they can teach us about, well, ourselves.
Me too. I'm excited to unpack all of that. So we've got Octavia and Bellamy, right? Two siblings, shaped by the same crazy world, but their paths are so different. It's wild to see how Earth brings out their strength, their weaknesses, and ultimately how they, redefine themselves.
Yeah, that's a total transformation, especially for Octavia. I mean, she starts as this hidden girl in the Ark, living under the floorboards, literally. And then, boom, she's this fierce warrior. It's like Earth, with all its dangers, somehow set her free.
It's amazing how she just embraces this totally new environment. You know, for those who maybe don't remember, Octavia was Bellamy's little sister, a secret on the Ark because of those population rules they had. She lived a super restricted life, always hiding. But on Earth, she's not just surviving, she's thriving.
Totally. She learns to hunt, to fight. She even learns the grounder language. She connects with the Earth in a way none of the other 100 do. It's like special.
It is. It's like she sheds that old identity and becomes someone totally new. And that scene where she wins that huge battle and becomes Sigripa, chills, man.
Chills, right.
Yeah.
It shows how far she's come from that scared girl we first met.
That scene is all about resilience, right? Octavia's journey isn't just about being physically strong. It's about finding where you belong in the world. On the Ark, she's an outcast. But with the Grounders, she finds acceptance, belonging, a family.
It's so relatable. I think everyone's felt like an outsider at some point, looking for where they fit in. But even when Octavia finds her people, it's not like suddenly everything's easy. She goes through so much loss, makes some, well, questionable choices.
Totally. She even goes down a pretty dark path for a while. Octavia's story shows how growth, it's not always a straight line, you know?
Exactly. There are setbacks, doubts, times you just feel lost. But it's about learning from those screw-ups, getting back up, and moving on.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's what makes her such a relatable character, you know? She's not perfect, not this perfect hero.
Oh, for sure. She's flawed, impulsive, sometimes even brutal. But she's also fiercely loyal, protective, and she's got her own sense of justice.
Which brings us to Bellamy. He's an interesting contrast, wouldn't you say?
Totally.
Where Octavia finds, freedom and purpose on Earth, Bellamy, he wrestles with responsibility, with the things he's done, the consequences.
Let's talk about him. He starts out as this rebel, right?
Yeah.
Always pushing back against authority, super protective of Octavia. You can tell he's always had to look out for himself and for her. And that's, shaped how he sees the world.
What I find interesting is that Bellamy's impulsiveness, it often comes from wanting to keep his people safe. He makes mistakes, for sure, some with big consequences, but he means well. He's a good reminder that even the best leaders, they mess up. And owning those mistakes, learning from them, that's how you grow.
He definitely learned some tough lessons. Remember, right away, he takes charge. Even though he doesn't really have the authority, he'll do whatever it takes to make sure the 100 survive, even if it means breaking the rules or, stepping on some toes.
That willingness to shake things up, to take a chance, it can be good and bad, right? It can inspire people, but it can also lead to conflict. Bellamy's whole arc is about learning to balance that impulse with what the group needs.
He goes from acting on instinct to, becoming a more strategic, thoughtful leader.
It's like he goes through leadership boot camp, but it's accelerated. And all the messy, real-life stuff comes with it. Betrayal, loss. He even has to face his own demons. It's not easy, but you see him trying to be better. That's what makes it so compelling.
Makes you wonder, would he have grown so much if he hadn't been forced to lead so soon? Would he have learned those tough lessons about responsibility and sacrifice if he didn't have all those lives depending on him?
Good question. I don't know. But the 100, it shows how we often grow in the most unexpected ways, the hardest ways.
Right. It's rarely comfy or easy. Often it hurts a lot. But it's when things are tough that we find out how strong we are.
You said it. Both Octavia and Bellamy, they're like walking examples of growth through hardship. They start so differently, but they both got to face their limits, make choices that suck, and they come out stronger, more, I don't know, complex.
Yeah. And that's something we can all connect with, right? That feeling of getting thrown into something and having to adapt, learn as you go, and figure out who you are along the way. It's not always pretty, but those challenges, that's where you find your potential.
So true. That's a big takeaway here for our listeners. Big life change, tough relationship, just trying to figure out what's next. Look at those challenges as a chance to grow.
It's in those uncertain times that you find your strengths, right?
Absolutely. And the 100 gives us two amazing examples of what that journey can look like. Now, speaking of journeys, I think it's time to dive into some of the bigger themes, the 100 tackles, because this show, it goes way beyond just surviving the apocalypse. It gets at the heart of what it means to be human.
Let's do it. Morality, identity, finding meaning. The 100 is packed with stuff that makes you think, I'm ready.
Get ready, because we're going deep, philosophically deep.
All right, so we've talked about Octavia and Bellamy, how much they change. But the 100, it really makes you think about those big moral questions. Like, what happens when the world is ending? What choices do people have to make? Makes you wonder, what would I do?
Yeah, it's intense. One of the things the show really digs into is that, that pull between wanting to be free, do your own thing, and the responsibility you have to everyone else.
Right. Especially when things are scarce.
Yeah.
It's like literally survive or die.
Yeah.
It impacts everyone.
Right.
It's like that trolley problem, playing out over and over. Save one person or risk a whole bunch of others. Heavy stuff.
Totally. And the show doesn't give you easy answers. It makes you sit with that discomfort. Like, is there even such a thing as a right choice when everything could go so wrong?
Makes you think. And we all face stuff like that, even if it's not, apocalypse level.
Yeah.
Do you go for that promotion, even if it means less time with family? Do you stand up for what's right, even if it's risky?
Those are the choices that stick with you. And the 100, it shows how those choices play out, how fear and prejudice can rip people apart.
But then we see the other side too, right?
Yeah.
How working together, empathy, understanding each other, those things can bring people together. It's like even when things seem impossible, you always have a choice. And those choices, they matter.
They really do. And another huge theme is that whole search for who you are, your identity. The 100, they're not just figuring out how to live, they're figuring out WHO they are now in this crazy new world.
Totally. Like with Octavia, she reinvents herself, becomes someone totally different from who she was back on the Ark.
Right. And Bellamy, he's always fighting with his past, trying to make his actions match the leader he wants to be.
It's like they show us that who we are, it's not set in stone. It can change. Our experiences, our choices, the people we're with, all that shapes us. And the 100 is like this reminder that figuring yourself out, it's a journey, not a destination.
Love that. It's a journey. And it can be messy, right? Wrong turns, screw-ups, times when you're like, who even am I anymore?
Totally. But it's about learning, picking yourself up, and trying to be better.
It's that toughness, never giving up hope. That's what makes the 100 so inspiring. They've got all this craziness thrown at them, but they find ways to connect with each other, to find purpose, to keep fighting for something better.
And I think that's the biggest thing we can take away from this show. Global crisis, personal struggles. We can choose hope over fear. We can build bridges, not walls. And we can't ever stop believing in the possibility of, like, a better tomorrow.
That's beautifully put. And I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the 100, doesn't it?
It really does.
Right.
Wow, so much to think about. So for everyone listening, we want to leave you with this. If you got sent back to Earth with the 100, what skill or what part of you would be your biggest strength? What would you bring to that uncertain future? Think about it. And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.